They came at sunset riding on the devil's breath, torches burning like fallen stars, gunfire ripping through the silence. Smoke choked the sky flames, devouring every beam, every memory she held dear. She watched from the dirt, helpless heart shattering, as the life she'd built burned to ash. But that night beneath a merciless moon, something in her changed. The desert had always been cruel, unforgiving, taking more than it ever gave. Now it would teach a different lesson. With nothing left but vengeance and the savage wisdom of survival, she swore a silent oath if they dared return. The sands would swallow their bones, and the desert always keeps its promises. The sun beat down mercilessly on the desert plain, causing the air to ripple with heat. Dry shrubs and scattered cacti stood sentry across the wide landscape. A solitary ranch battered by years of sun and wind clung stubbornly to the hard-packed earth. From a distance it might have seemed abandoned. Its fences crooked, its paint long since peeled away to reveal dull gray planks. But within that humble homestead lived Rachel Beckett, a woman of quiet strength and hidden scars. Rachel woke before the sun each morning, her modest bedroom still shadowed by the lingering darkness of night. On this day she rose with a soft groan, the ache in her joints reminding her that though she was just past 40, the desert life could make a person feel older. She rubbed the back of her neck and let her gaze wander to the nightstand. There stood a simple wooden picture frame holding a photograph of her husband, Carl Beckett. It had been taken a year before his death, his laugh frozen in time, eyes full of a fierce love for life. Though Rachel's daily routine was simple, tending to the goats, caring for the modest patch of land left after she'd sold off some acreage, her mind was far from tranquil. Each morning she walked to the old barn to check on the goats, her old dog Jed trotting beside her. The dryness of the desert had become more pronounced in recent weeks, and the feed for the animals was running dangerously low. For her, the days seemed to blend together: sunrise chores, sunset memories, memories of Carl, memories of what they had built and the legacy they had hoped to leave behind, and the nagging recollection of her father's disapproval of her softness, though that softness had once been her greatest strength. At mid-morning, the Arizona sky was clear and cloudless. Rachel used to find comfort in that endless horizon, like life was wide open with possibility. Now it felt like a stark reminder of her solitude. She carried on, though. That was all one could do in the desert. Keep walking, keep working, or get swallowed by the unforgiving sands long before she became the widow Beckett. Rachel was Rachel Cross, daughter of a man who believed in self-reliance to the point of mercilessness. Her father, Robert Cross, taught her everything about living off the land, how to handle firearms, how to survive in a place that gave no quarter. He'd once served as a scout in the cavalry. Rachel recalled the times she'd watch him approach rattlesnakes with calm precision, dispatch them with a single bullet, and then remind her that one mistake was all it took for the desert to claim a life. But Robert Cross's lessons came wrapped in a harshness that left Rachel's young heart bruised. When she finally found a gentle, affable ranch hand named Carl Beckett, she latched onto his kindness. Her father disapproved. He'd wanted her to marry a man with a more combative spirit or none at all. The two parted ways on bitter terms. Rachel's later years with Carl were the happiest of her life, building a small ranch from the ground up, forging a peaceful existence in the desert's quiet. Carl was protective, but he didn't have that violent edge her father had. He was a good man, loved by neighbors, respected in the nearby town. So when a rogue band of outlaws passed through 5 years ago, demanding supplies and stepping onto the property like they owned it, Carl tried to reason with them. One particularly sadistic outlaw shot him down in cold blood. Rachel watched Carl collapse. His final words, that last gasp for life. Those moments haunted her even more than the dryness of the desert wind. The outlaws took nothing, apparently satisfied with leaving a body, and a fresh widow. Rachel's heartbreak hardened into anger, forging her soul into steel beneath a stoic exterior. She buried Carl on the hill behind the ranch, next to the mesquite tree that offered the only bit of shade. As she covered his grave, she made a silent vow. If anyone ever threatened her again, they would find her a very different woman than the one who meekly stood by watching her husband die. On a sweltering afternoon, Rachel decided to ride into the nearest town, Sable Rock, for supplies. She saddled her aging horse, Cinnamon, and set off at a slow trot. Jed, too old to run the distance, remained behind to patrol the property. The desert stretched out on all sides, a tapestry of dust and rugged beauty. But Rachel felt a creeping unease tug at her mind. She kept looking over her shoulder, half expecting to see a posse of outlaws riding her down. She had grown less trusting, more watchful. Sable Rock was a modest settlement with a handful of essential establishments: a blacksmith, a general store, a saloon that doubled as a social hub. As she tied Cinnamon outside the general store, she noticed an unfamiliar group of men loitering by the saloon doors, dusty, sinister looking with narrow eyes scanning passersby. Their leader, a lanky man with pockmarked cheeks, seemed to make note of her presence. Rachel held his gaze for a moment, feeling that old flicker of dread. Inside the store, she collected flour, sugar, coffee, and a new spool of wire for her fences. The storekeeper, Molly Jensen, a kindly older woman, recognized the tension in Rachel's face. Molly softly, "Rachel, you look like you've seen a ghost." "Everything all right, Rachel? Maybe there are some men out there I don't recognize." The one with the scars on his face was staring at me like he knew something about me. "Molly, lots of strangers passing through. Word is some new troubles brewing across the region. You be careful, dear." She thanked Molly, paid for her goods, and stepped back outside into the harsh sunlight. The men at the saloon watched her climb onto Cinnamon. One offered a mocking tip of his hat. She turned her horse and spurred it into a quicker gait, feeling eyes on her back all the way out of town. As the ranch came into sight, Rachel's eyes swept over the property, alert to any change. Nothing seemed amiss. Jed dozed on the porch, muzzle resting on his paws. Rachel took the supplies inside, stowed them in the small pantry, and then poured water into a metal basin to wash away the dust. In the reflection of the water, she caught sight of her own face, tired, drawn. She saw the faint outlines of a scar above her left eyebrow from a childhood accident. Her father had told her that day, "You won't win any fights if you see yourself as a victim." She almost laughed at the memory. He would have been proud to see how she'd changed after Carl's death. In the stillness, Rachel clenched her fists and repeated words she had whispered over Carl's grave. "Rachel, I won't be a victim again." That night, lying in bed, she tossed and turned with dreams of old battles, her father teaching her to shoot in the searing desert sun. Carl smiling one moment and bleeding the next. Outlaws looming over a funeral pyre. The desert wind howled outside. She woke, gasping for breath. The next morning dawned with an overcast sky, a rarity in the region. Rachel had barely risen when she heard frantic bleating from the goat pen. She hurried outside, rifle in hand. The pen gate was smashed open. She found the carcass of her largest goat on the ground, throat cut and the rest of the herd scattered. Her heart pounded. Could this be coyotes? Unlikely. She had seen coyote attacks before, and they left telltale signs: torn, flesh, ragged footprints. This was a clean cut. A message nearby in the dust, she saw a boot print bigger than her own. She looked up, scanning the horizon. There was no one in sight, but she felt the weight of a watchful presence somewhere in the distance. Rachel whispering to herself, "They're testing me." She remembered her father's lessons about tracking. Carefully, she knelt to examine the footprints. They led away from the pen, heading into the rocky expanse beyond her property. She followed for a short distance, rifle at the ready, until the prints faded. By then, the sky had gone from gray to bright white in the rising sun, and beads of sweat trickled down her forehead. Returning to the ranch, she closed the gate and spent the next hour rounding up the terrified goats. Jed followed her, anxiously sniffing at the air. That night, for the first time since Carl's death, she prepared the ranch for a siege of sorts, boarding up windows that had been left open for ventilation, setting a rifle by every door. Just after midday, as the sun blazed, Rachel heard hooves thunder across the desert road. She grabbed her shotgun and peered outside. A group of 4 riders approached. She recognized the lanky, pockmarked man from Sable Rock. He rode at the front, a sardonic grin on his face. Pockmarked man calling out, "Hello there. Got a moment to talk?" Rachel stood on the porch, the shotgun resting casually on her hip. "Rachel, state your business." The men dismounted. One of them, a broad-shouldered brute with a bandana around his neck, spat in the dust. Another, wearing a vest covered in small silver conchos, eyed the goats in the pen. Pockmarked man heard your Rachel Beckett. We've been riding through looking for prospects. Maybe we could do some business, Rachel. I don't have any business with men who sneak onto my property at night. He raised an eyebrow. Pockmarked man. Sneak I don't follow. Rachel's jaw tightened. She looked at the broad-shouldered man. He looked back with a mocking smirk. Rachel, one of you killed my goat last night. I suggest you leave. The pockmarked man raised his hands, feigning innocence. Pockmarked man. Now, we don't go around slitting goats' throats, lady. We're respectable folks just passing through, hoping to lighten your load. Maybe buy some supplies. The desert's a tough place. We pay fair for water and feed. He nodded at the water barrel near the porch. Rachel, I'm not selling. Leave or I'll ask you to leave with lead. A tense silence. Then the pockmarked man chuckled softly, meeting Rachel's cold stare. Pockmarked man? You got a feisty spirit, Miss Beckett, but the desert can swallow a person who tries to stand alone. With that, he tipped his hat and motioned for his men to remount pockmarked man before riding off. We'll be around if you change your mind. Rachel watched them disappear into the shimmering horizon. Only when she was sure they were gone did she lower her shotgun. Her nerves hummed with adrenaline. She had no doubt they were responsible for the dead goat, and she suspected they had bigger plans for her ranch. Her father's voice echoed in her mind. If they come for you, be ready. If they test you, show them your teeth. Rachel spent the next days reinforcing her fences, setting up rudimentary traps around the perimeter of the property tripwires, connected to old tin cans that would rattle an alarm, a few hidden pits covered by camouflage netting, sharpened stakes hammered into the ground behind a ridge. She dragged deadwood and brush to form barricades near potential vantage points. She also unpacked the weapons she had stored away after Carl's death, a couple of revolvers, a well-worn rifle that had belonged to her father, and an old box of dynamite sticks left over from some ranch expansion project. She tested the fuses, ensuring they were still usable, carefully cleaning the firearms by lamplight. All the while, she felt the desert watch her with an indifferent eye. Life here was survival of the fittest. She was resolved not to be a casualty again. Yet beyond her anger and determination, she felt loneliness pressing in. She had no real allies out here. The nearest neighbors were miles away, and she suspected even they wouldn't risk their lives for her if these men meant to do serious harm. Near dusk, several days after the men's visit, a sudden explosion rocked the ranch. The west fence blew apart in a spray of sand and wood splinters. Rachel rushed outside, rifle in hand. Through the swirling dust, she glimpsed silhouettes on horseback, flickers of torchlight dancing in the twilight. Voice from the darkness. You gonna sell us that water now? Widow, a mocking laugh echoed. Rachel saw the pockmarked man, half lit by torch flame. One of his men hurled a second stick of dynamite toward the barn. Rachel dove to the ground as the barn's doors exploded in a thunderous roar. Wooden debris rained down. Jed barked furiously, racing into the chaos. The men began firing shots at random bullets, zinging past Rachel's ear. In a burst of adrenaline, she scrambled behind an overturned water trough. She remembered the small stash of dynamite in the house, but she couldn't reach it without crossing open ground. Two of the riders dismounted and advanced cautiously, revolvers in hand. Rachel peered through a gap in the trough, took aim with her rifle, and squeezed the trigger. One man staggered and fell, clutching his shoulder with a groan. The other fired wildly at her position, pockmarked man yelling, "Don't waste too much ammo. We just need her to understand who's in charge." He rode closer, brandishing a torch. With a swift motion, he flung it onto the roof of the ranch house. Flames caught on the dry wood immediately. A pang of horror shot through Rachel. That house was all she had left of Carl, of their shared dreams. She knew if the roof went up in flames, the entire structure could be lost in minutes. Summoning her courage, she fired again at the pockmarked man, but he swerved his horse and the shot went wide. Flames roared overhead. Jed barked at the men who took quick aim. "Rachel." "Jed, no. Come back here." Before she could fire, a bullet caught Jed in the flank. He let out a pained yelp and crumpled, enraged. Rachel rushed forward, ignoring the bullets that whizzed past. She pressed herself low to the ground and reached her wounded dog, her rifle pinned under her arm. Rachel, through clenched teeth, "You'll pay for this." She tried to get a clear shot at the attackers, but was forced to duck behind a smoldering chunk of the barn's wall as fresh shots cracked. The heat from the burning house grew intense. Acrid smoke stung Rachel's eyes and she coughed, tears mingling with soot. She realized with sinking dread that the men weren't just testing her anymore. They aimed to destroy her livelihood. She heard the pockmarked man laugh. Pockmarked man. That's enough for now, boys. We'll let the desert do the rest. They began to withdraw, bullets still peppering the ground around her. One more explosion rattled the yard. Another stick of dynamite tossed near the barn's remains, obliterating it further. Fire licked the sky, painting everything in an orange glow. Then the riders vanished into the darkness, leaving only the crackle of flames. Crawling on her hands and knees, Rachel dragged herself and Jed to a small trough, near the well far enough from the collapsing structures. She slumped against the trough chest, heaving, tears cutting through the dirt on her cheeks. Jed whimpered. She gently placed a hand on his head. Rachel, stay with me. Boy, time blurred. She didn't know how long she lay there, stunned by the suddenness of the attack. The house fire raged on, but her immediate priority was Jed. Finally, she forced herself to move. She tore her shirt sleeve and pressed it against the dog's wound. The bullet seemed to have lodged in the muscle, bleeding, but maybe not lethal. Still, the ranch house was lost. The roof collapsed inward with a groan of timbers. Rachel felt a piece of her heart die with it. She inhaled the thick smoke, pulling Jed further away, tears streaming as she watched the flames devour years of memory. In the harsh glare of the fire, she realized she still had a chance to save some supplies. She limped over to the small shed behind the house, miraculously untouched by the flames. She yanked open the door and gathered the few crates of bullets, the leftover dynamite. She found an old canteen, filled it with water from the well, and returned to Jed, pressing the canteen to his muzzle. Rachel hoarsely, I'm sorry, boy. Just hold on. They spent a harrowing night under the open sky, the fire eventually dying to smoldering embers. Rachel dozed fitfully, rifle clutched in her arms. Jed by her side. At dawn, she saw the extent of the devastation. The ranch house was reduced to a smoking skeleton of charred beams, the barn a blackened crater. The west fence lay in ruins. Of the goats, only a handful remained near the pen, bleeding in distress. Exhausted and haunted, Rachel carefully cleaned and bandaged Jed's wound with what little medical supplies she had. Then she surveyed the ranch with a distant, unblinking gaze. Fire had stolen her home, but not her life. She had promised herself that never again would she be a victim. She could feel panic threatening to break her, but something stronger rose in its place. Determination. She had lost Carl. Now she'd lost the home they built together. But as long as she lived, she would not let these marauders claim another inch of her soul. Throughout the day, she worked to establish a makeshift shelter beside the old well, using scorched wooden planks that could still hold weight. She set up a small tarpaulin to shield Jed from the sun. Then she began to transform the ranch into a battlefield on her terms. She dug a deeper trench around the property, a perimeter to funnel attackers into predictable routes. She rigged tripwire traps more extensively, using the fence wires she had purchased from Sable Rock. She tied tin cans to the wires, filled them with a few small metal shards to rattle louder when tripped. She scattered her few sticks of dynamite along the potential entry points, rigging them with makeshift fuses that she could ignite from a distance. Her father's teachings came back in force. She remembered how he set traps around their old cabin whenever they expected trouble. Punji stakes hidden under brush logs, positioned to roll down slope and crush approaching enemies. Even simple illusions to misdirect. Rachel adapted those tactics for the desert. She noted the vantage points on nearby ridges. The men had come from one direction, but they might circle around. She scouted potential sniper positions for herself if she needed to pick them off from a distance. That night she slept only in fits. The desert was eerily quiet after the chaos. She stayed close to Jed, who licked her hand weakly, his eyes glimmering with trust. She realized the simplest reason she was fighting now: for Jed's life, for the memory of Carl, for the ranch that was more than just a place. It was her anchor in a harsh world. At sunrise the next day, a lone rider approached from the direction of Sable Rock. Rachel leveled her rifle, ready to fire. But as the figure grew closer, she recognized Sheriff Walt Crenshaw, an older man with a salt and pepper beard, a limp from an old gunshot wound. Sheriff Crenshaw, raising a hand. Rachel, Don't shoot. It's me. She lowered the rifle, but her stance remained tense. Rachel, Sheriff. Surprised you're out this far. He pulled his horse to a stop near the charred ruins, his eyes widening at the sight. Sheriff, I heard from travelers that smoke was coming from this direction. Wanted to see if you were all right. She gave a bitter laugh, gesturing at the blackened remains. Rachel, fine as I can be, I suppose. The sheriff slid down from his horse. Sheriff, who did this, Rachel? A group led by a tall man with pockmarks. They came at night, tossed dynamite, set fire to everything. Sheriff, frowning, I've heard rumors of a new gang passing through. They call themselves the Thornbush Raiders? Might be them. Rachel spat into the dust. Rachel, they murdered my animals, nearly killed me. Shot Jed, they're going to pay. The sheriff sighed, looking around helplessly. Sheriff, Rachel, I know you're tough, but if this is who I think it is, they're more than just a few hired guns. They have numbers. They've been leaving a trail of terror across the territory. Maybe it's best you come back to Sable Rock. We can keep you safe there. She shook her head, jaw set. Rachel. No, this is my land. Carl and I built it. I won't let them run me off. He laid a sympathetic hand on her shoulder. Sheriff, I can't spare much manpower, but I'll try to send a deputy or two if they come around town. Don't do anything reckless. Rachel's voice dropped, her eyes fierce. Rachel, they already took everything. If they come back, I'm ready. The sheriff gave her a long, measuring look, then nodded solemnly. Sheriff May, God help you, Rachel. He remounted, glancing at the destruction one last time before heading back to town. Rachel watched him go with a mixture of gratitude and frustration. Part of her wanted help, but she knew the desert's isolation meant she was mostly on her own. Left alone again, Rachel found herself overwhelmed by the tasks ahead. She needed water, food, medical supplies for Jed, and a safe place to sleep. The desert sun was relentless, punishing her with triple-digit heat. She stood by the well, gazing at the swirling dust devils in the distance. Her mind drifted back to a day, long ago, when her father had forced her to go 2 days with minimal water to build toughness. She remembered the dryness in her throat, the pounding headache, and how she had silently resented his cruelty. But now she realized those experiences had forged an endurance in her. She would not break easily, Rachel thinking. Thank you, Father, though I hated you for it. She checked on Jed, who had drunk some water. The bleeding slowed. He wagged his tail weakly. She gave him a small pat on the head. Rachel softly, I'm going to fix this, I promise. At midday, she spotted a small group of horsemen again, tensing for another attack. She grabbed her rifle and took position behind the rubble. As they got closer, she realized it was a half-dozen ranchers and townsfolk neighbors who had heard about the attack and came to see if they could lend a hand. Leading them was a wiry man named Henry Glover, who'd once been a friend of Carl's. Henry calling out, Rachel, it's Henry. We mean no harm. She lowered her rifle for a moment. Relief flashed across her face. They brought a couple of water barrels, some bandages, and a small crate of canned goods, Henry. Heard what happened. We can't stay long, but figured you might use some help. Rachel's eyes misted with gratitude. She nodded, her voice momentarily failing her. They spent a few hours helping her bury the dead goats and clear some of the rubble. They set up a canvas tarp where the barn once stood to serve as a temporary shelter for the remaining animals. Henry quietly as they work. Rachel, you sure you don't want to come with us? It's safer in town. A woman on her own like this? She shook her head firmly. Rachel, I appreciate what y'all are doing, but I can't run. They'll follow and more will die. Here I can set my traps, control the ground. Henry sighed. Henry, you're as stubborn as Carl was. She smiled at the memory, though it was tinged with grief. Before they left, Henry pressed a small revolver into her hand. Henry, I know you're armed, but one more can't hurt. After they departed, Rachel felt less alone, if only for a short while. She used the bandages they provided to better dress. Jed's wound forced him to drink more water and fed him small scraps. She took an inventory of the supplies, enough canned goods to last maybe a few weeks if she rationed carefully. That night the sky shimmered with stars. With the house gone, Rachel could see more of them than ever. She found herself lying awake, nestled in a bedroll beside Jed and the flickering embers of a small campfire. The desert nights could be cold, but her heart burned with rage and sorrow. Suddenly she heard the distant rumble of hoofbeats. She snapped awake, heart pounding, but the sound faded quickly and no one approached. Perhaps it was her imagination, or just mustangs running wild. In the quiet, she spoke to Carl in her mind, telling him everything: the men who'd come, the burning of the ranch, her vow of vengeance. She thought of her father and the grudges that separated them. She wondered if somewhere he was alive, or if the desert had claimed him. A stray thought surfaced. Could her father's old knowledge help her now? He had taught her how to build rudimentary booby traps, spike traps, net traps, even hidden powder charges. She knew the topography for miles around, knew how to funnel an enemy into a kill zone. But the men who attacked her might just be the tip of the spear. If they belonged to a bigger gang, more trouble could be coming. She needed something drastic, something that would make these outlaws think twice about ever stepping foot on her land again. By dawn, Rachel had a grim plan forming. She would use the desert itself as a weapon. She knew the paths to the ranch, the rocky defiles where men and horses would be forced to pass the gullies, where a single spark could create a wall of flames if the brush were dry enough. Her father's motto echoed: control the environment and you control the fight. Her ranch might be in ruins, but the surrounding desert offered an opportunity to strike back. She would lay traps far beyond the immediate perimeter, turning the approach roads into a labyrinth of pitfalls, ambush points, and hidden explosives. A single faint hope that she could pick off the next wave of attackers, reduce their numbers. So fear, if she could hold out long enough, maybe they'd cut their losses and move on. She spent that day riding cinnamon to various points, carefully covering her tracks, planting sticks of dynamite in shallow holes along the main approach route. She rigged them with tripwires, each line cleverly concealed under sand and brush. She staked out vantage points behind large rocks where she could hide and fire at will. Though physically exhausted, her mind burned with fierce energy. Each trap she set felt like an act of justice. Her hands trembled with a cold fury as she imagined the outlaws riding into her cunning snare. By nightfall, she had laid a network of hidden hazards that circled her homestead on 3 sides, the fourth side being an impassable ridge of jagged rock. She finished her last setup, returning to the ranch under starlight, mind racing with possibilities and dangers. She returned to find footprints near her makeshift camp. Her heart seized. She raised her revolver and scanned the darkness with a lantern. Jed stirred, whining softly. Had the outlaws come while she was gone? Her pulse pounded as she tracked the footprints, which led to a spot behind a half-collapsed wall. There she found something that made her blood run cold. A ragged piece of cloth with the insignia of the Thornbush Raiders pinned to it. Stuck into the wall was a hunting knife. The message was clear. They had been here watching, and they left a calling card, but that wasn't the worst of it. As she picked up the cloth, she noticed a scrawled note on the back. We were just the beginning. The real threat is coming soon. Better run, widow. The words felt like a punch to the gut. The men who attacked her ranch, the ones who nearly killed her, weren't even the main force. They were likely scouts testing her defenses, seeing how she would react. Suddenly, everything made sense: the pockmarked man's casual confidence, the way they retreated rather than finishing her off. They were only the first wave of preliminary strike. The real gang, dozens strong, might be heading her way. Rachel's jaw tightened. Fear fluttered in her stomach, but a steely resolve clamped down on it. Rachel whispering, so be it. Let them come. Her father had once told her, if you have to fight, fight like you're already dead, because fear will paralyze you otherwise. She felt that sense of finality now. There was nowhere to run. She had nowhere to go. This land was all she had left, and she would defend it with her life if need be. She crumpled the note and stared into the night. The outlaws' next arrival would be soon, and it would be bigger, deadlier. But if they thought she would crumble, they had no idea who they were dealing with now. Night in the desert was a realm of stillness, save for the scuttling of lizards and the faint whisper of wind through scraggly brush. Under the vast canopy of stars, Rachel Beckett lay prone on a rocky ledge overlooking her ranch. She'd chosen this spot to keep watch rifle by her side. Her dog Jed, still wounded, rested in a sheltered nook below, hidden from prying eyes. Her mind churned with the realization that the men who attacked were only a scouting party. The real storm was gathering on the horizon, and she had precious little time to prepare. Over the next few nights, Rachel scarcely slept. She patrolled the perimeter, tested her traps, and practiced quick-draw drills with her revolvers. Each day, the desert sun scorched her shoulders and back, leaving her skin raw and blistered. But she pressed on, driven by a near-manic resolve. She also worried about Jed, whose wound was slowly healing, but still might prove fatal if infection set in. Each morning, she cleaned and redressed the bullet hole, using the last of her whiskey and a few leftover bandages. She spoke to him softly, promising that once this was over, she'd find a real doctor. Rachel stroking Jed's fur. "You and me, boy, we'll see this through. Just hold on." During her restless nights, she would sometimes glimpse movement in the distance. Could be wild animals, could be lurking outlaws. The tension wore on her nerves, but her father's training had prepared her for vigil. She would not be ambushed again. On the fourth day after the initial attack, she heard distant hoofbeats approaching from the north. She sprang into action, crouching behind a stand of cacti rifles sighted on the approaching figure. Through the shimmering heat, she recognized Molly Jensen, the kindly storekeeper from Sable Rock, mounted on a mule. Molly wore a wide-brimmed straw hat and carried saddlebags bulging with supplies. Molly calling out tremulously, "Rachel, are you there?" Rachel lowered her rifle, but kept it in hand. She stepped forward, scanning the horizon for any sign Molly might be followed. "Rachel? Molly, why in God's name did you come out here alone?" Molly dismounted, breathing hard from the sweltering journey. "Molly, I brought some things. Medicine salve for burns. Some more food. Heard about your ranch." Rachel's heart softened at the gesture, though she remained on guard. "Rachel, it's not safe, Molly. You should get back before dark." Molly nodded anxiously, glancing at the ruined property. Molly softly, "My husband served with Carl once. We owe you both a kindness. If there's anything else you need, let me know. But Rachel, the folks in town are scared. These men, the Thornbush Raiders, they're rumored to be heading this way in force. People say you should flee." A flicker of defiance ignited in Rachel's eyes. "Rachel, I appreciate the supplies, truly. But I won't run. This is my home." Molly took Rachel's hand. "Molly, then at least accept our help. We can't fight for you, but we can keep you supplied. I'll try to come again in a week if it's safe." Rachel felt a surge of gratitude that blurred her vision. "Rachel, you're a good friend. Thank you." After a brief rest, Molly departed, urging her mule to a brisk trot. Rachel watched her go, a strange mixture of relief and dread settling over her. People in town were talking. Word of her stand would reach the raiders as well. This fight was becoming inevitable. That very night, Rachel awoke to the distant crack of gunfire. She bolted upright, grabbing her rifle. Another shot echoed closer this time. She hurried to her vantage point on the rocky ledge, scanning the moonlit expanse. She spotted two riders approaching her perimeter, their horses at full gallop. A muzzle flash lit the darkness. One of them was firing in her direction. She ducked the bullet, ricocheting off a nearby rock. Rachel muttering, "You want to fight? You'll get one." She scrambled behind a boulder, steadying her rifle. With careful aim, she squeezed the trigger. A scream told her she'd found her mark. One rider toppled from his saddle. The other wheeled around, shouting curses, returning fire. Rachel pulled back, loading another round. Suddenly, a sharp pain flared in her shoulder, grazed by a bullet. She bit down, suppressing a cry, Rachel to herself. "Focus, don't freeze." She reached for a small stick of dynamite she'd brought with her, one of her last spares. She lit the fuse with shaking fingers, waited 2 seconds, then hurled it toward the attacking rider. The explosion tore through the night sand and rock, spraying in all directions. When the dust cleared, the rider was gone, either killed or fled. She cautiously descended to check the perimeter. The man she had shot lay crumpled on the ground, moaning his horse had bolted. "Rachel, who sent you?" He glared at her face, contorted with pain. "Raider, go to hell, widow. The Thornbush Raiders are coming. Your traps won't save you." She was tempted to finish him off, but a flicker of humanity stopped her. He was just an expendable thug. Let him crawl away or die. She turned, pressing a hand to her bleeding shoulder. Back at her makeshift camp, she used some of Molly's salve to treat the wound. It burned like fire, tears streaming down her cheeks as she fought to keep from passing out. She realized more acutely than ever that she was alone in this. One serious injury could end her. With each day tension ratcheted up, Rachel felt the presence of the raiders even if they weren't openly attacking. She found new footprints, discovered small sabotage like her Wells rope being cut in the night. She replaced it, redoubled her patrols. Finally, a familiar face appeared on the horizon. Henry Glover, her neighbor who had once helped bury her goats. Relief washed over her. She met him near the edge of her property, smiling. Despite her exhaustion, "Rachel Henry, you have no idea how glad I am to see a friendly face." But something was off in Henry's demeanor. He kept glancing over his shoulder, fidgeting with his reins. "Henry, Rachel, I came to warn you." He lowered his voice, leaning in. Henry trembling, "The Thornbush Raiders. They cornered me, threatened my family if I didn't cooperate. They wanted me to find your weak spots, map out your traps." Rachel's blood ran cold. "Rachel, Henry, please tell me you didn't." He bowed his head in shame. "Henry, I'm sorry. They have my wife and kids under guard. I had no choice." He extended a shaky hand, holding a rolled piece of parchment. Her ranch layout, details of her fortifications. Rachel's heart pounded with betrayal. Henry, tears in his eyes. "I tried to mislead them a bit, but they forced me to be exact." "I'm sorry." Rachel, rage and heartbreak warred within her. Henry had been a friend, but how could she blame him for protecting his family? "Rachel, get out. Go back to them before they suspect anything." He looked at her with anguished eyes. "Henry, I never wanted to do this to you. Forgive me." She turned away, unable to speak. Henry rode off. Her hands shook, the scrawled map mocking her. The raiders now had crucial intelligence. Her traps, her vantage points, all of it. She sank to the ground, sobbing in anger. The betrayal cut deep. This changes everything. With her defenses compromised, Rachel had to adapt. She spent the next few days dismantling old traps and recreating new ones elsewhere. She moved the dynamite charges to alternate routes, set decoy tripwires to misdirect. It was backbreaking work. She labored through her shoulder pain, nearly collapsing from dehydration. She told herself, if they think they know where the traps are, I'll make them walk right into new ones. She also began to harness the natural hazards of the desert. She scouted patches of cacti that could become a makeshift barrier. If driven there, identified old gullies prone to flash floods. If she could divert water, her father had once diverted a small stream to flood out bandits. She set about to do the same with the meager supply from her well, though she knew it was a long shot. As Rachel toiled, she grew weaker. Her shoulder wound wasn't healing properly, and she hadn't had time to properly rest or scavenge for food beyond the rations that Molly brought. One night as she tried to refill her canteen, she realized the well's water level was critically low. She needed to ration or risk losing it entirely. To keep Jed alive, she sacrificed her own water. Day after day, the dog improved slightly, but Rachel felt the creeping effects of dehydration. She grew lightheaded, her vision blurred at times. The day came when she faced a heartbreaking decision. She couldn't maintain both her life and Jed's on this limited water. She gently held Jed's head, tears in her eyes, Rachel choking up. "I'm so sorry, boy. I can't let you suffer out here, if I can't keep you alive." For hours, she wrestled with the thought of putting him down mercifully to free him from the slow death of thirst or infection. But every time she raised the gun, her hands shook. She remembered how Jed would lay his head on Carl's lap, how they'd chase rabbits together at sunset. In desperation, she concocted a plan. She would send Jed away on the next wagon or traveler heading into town in the hope that someone could save him. The price was that she'd be without his protection, but it might save his life. Sure enough, 2 days later, a traveling peddler named Saul Bixby happened upon the ranch seeking to hawk cheap trinkets or gather local goods. Rachel struck a deal. She gave the man her last bit of cash and asked him to take Jed to the town vet. Rachel's voice trembling. "Tell them, he's my family. If I survive this, I'll be there to get him." Saul, though hesitant, finally agreed to take the dog. Rachel watched with hollow eyes as they departed Jed, looking back at her with confusion. It felt like her heart was being ripped out, but she knew it was the only chance for Jed. She stood there in the empty yard, tears streaking her sun-scorched cheeks. Now she was truly alone. The ranch was all but a fortress of solitude, and she had given up the last living creature she cared for to save him. It happened at dawn, a distant rumble growing louder. Rachel climbed to her vantage point and saw a line of riders, more than a dozen, kicking up dust in the early morning light. At the head of the pack was the pock-marked man who'd first threatened her, and beside him was a bigger, more imposing figure, Boss Quinn, leader of the Thornbush Raiders. He wore a black duster and had a thick scar crossing his jaw. They halted just outside rifle range, presumably cautious of her booby traps. She could almost smell their arrogance on the wind. Quinn shouted, his voice booming across the desert. "Quinn Widow Beckett, we're here for your land. Don't make this any harder on yourself. We got your friend Henry's map, but we know you've changed some things. Why don't you come out and spare yourself the trouble?" Rachel said nothing. She kept low, cradling her rifle, breathing steadily. She counted at least 15 men, each armed with rifles, revolvers, maybe even dynamite. Quinn yelling again. "We gave you a fair warning when we sent the first bunch. This is the end of the line." Suddenly, one of the men near the front dismounted and walked forward, testing the ground with a long stick. He probed for tripwires. Rachel recognized him as an older man with a cunning glint in his eye. Riley, rumored to be the best trap spotter in the territory, Rachel muttering. So they brought an expert? Her heart pounded. Everything depended on whether her newly placed traps would fool this man. Riley slowly advanced, motioning the others to follow once he deemed it safe. The group formed a loose line, ready to fan out around the property. Rachel waited until they were within her adjusted perimeter. She exhaled, squeezed the trigger. A shot rang out, catching one raider in the chest. The man tumbled from his horse. Gunfire erupted in return, bullets whizzing past Rachel's cover. She ducked, crawled to a second vantage point behind a rock, and fired again. Quinn bellowing, "Spread out." Find her men dismounted and began closing in on foot, stepping carefully to avoid traps. Another man triggered a tripwire, which set off a small dynamite charge. He was flung backward with a scream. The explosion spooked the horses, adding to the chaos. Rachel felt a grim satisfaction. The desert echoed with thunderous blasts, the screams of wounded men, the crack of gunfire. A bullet pinged off a rock near her face, cutting her cheek. She wiped the blood teeth bared in determination. But the raiders didn't scatter as easily as the first group. They regrouped, used covering fire to protect each other while they probed for more traps. Slowly they advanced toward Rachel's central position. She scrambled from rock to rock, firing, carefully picking off 2 more men, but they had numbers on their side. After a short time, they had her pinned behind a cluster of boulders. The pockmarked man taunted her from a distance, his voice echoing. "Pockmarked man. We got you now, widow. You're out of bullets eventually." Rachel glanced at her ammo belt. She was running dangerously low. Her body trembled with fatigue, dehydration, and the pain in her shoulder flaring anew. She retreated deeper into the property, leading them into another trap-laden zone near the collapsed barn. As Quinn's men rounded a corner, 2 of them stumbled into a pit Rachel had dug and lined with wooden spikes. They yelled, impaled, the sight enough to freeze the hearts of any behind them. The rest paused, exchanging uncertain looks. "Quinn, keep going. She's only one woman." They pressed forward, the stench of gunpowder and sweat filling the air. Rachel realized with mounting dread that they were too many. She might take out half, but the rest would get her eventually. Desperate, she fell back toward the rear of the property where she'd set her final line of defense, a narrow pass between 2 rock formations. She had rigged a significant cache of dynamite there, enough to create a rock slide and cut off pursuit. She reached the hidden detonator wire, fumbling to ignite it, but as she did, a shot rang out from behind. The bullet tore through her calf, and she dropped to her knees with a cry. Her trembling fingers lost the match. "Rachel, no. No." She tried to reach for the spare matches, but Quinn and 2 of his men rushed up, guns aimed squarely at her. Quinn snarling, "Drop it or I'll shoot you in the head right now." She froze, blood soaking her pant leg. He kicked her rifle away, sneering. "Quinn, you've put up a hell of a fight, widow, but you're done." She looked at the wire leading to the dynamite just feet from her hand, but any sudden move would be her last. Quinn motioned to the pockmarked man. "Quinn, tie her up. Let's see what she's worth alive. Maybe we'll ransom her to the town." Rachel locked eyes with the pockmarked man, who gave her a cruel smile. He holstered his revolver and stepped closer, rope in hand. At that moment, she felt a wave of clarity wash over her. If they took her alive, they'd surely torture her, use her as bait, or worse, the ranch would become a base for their operations, unleashing terror on others. Her gaze flickered to the dynamite line. If she could just create a distraction, a spark. With a final burst of willpower, she feigned weakness, letting her body sag. As the pockmarked man reached for her arm, she lunged forward, grabbing a small pocket pistol hidden in the back of her waistband. She fired point blank into his stomach. He gasped and fell backward. In the same motion, she clawed for a match from her belt pouch, struck it against a rock, and touched it to the fuse. Quinn realized what she was doing too late. Quinn shouting, "Stop her!" A bullet caught Rachel in the side, but she held the match to the fuse anyway, eyes wide with grim resolve. The fuse hissed to life. She rolled away, ignoring the fiery pain in her torso. Rachel murmuring, "For Carl. For everything." She closed her eyes as the explosion tore through the pass rocks, thundered down in a deafening cascade, burying Quinn and a portion of his men alive. Fire and debris filled the air, a deadly hail of stone fragments. Rachel was hurled backward by the shock waves slamming into the ground. For a moment her vision swam with white spots, her ears ringing. She heard screams, the groan of collapsing rock, then silence. When she came to dust, clogged her mouth and nostrils. Her side burned with agony and blood trickled from her calf. She forced herself to sit up, wincing. The area before her was choked with rubble. Some of the thornbush raiders lay motionless beneath fallen boulders. Others moaned in pain, pinned or gravely wounded. There was no sign of Quinn or the pock-marked man. They were likely buried under the landslide. Just a handful of the gang might have escaped, scattered to the winds. Rachel struggled to stand, leaning heavily on a broken plank. The entire property was a wreck. Smoke rose from scorched earth. The remnants of traps lay strewn about, and the early dawn light revealed the scale of the devastation. She coughed, her lungs seizing. She needed water, medical attention. She stumbled forward, scanning for anything or anyone that might finish her off. Suddenly she heard a faint voice calling her name. She turned, half expecting to see a phantom. Through the swirling dust came a figure she hadn't seen in years. Robert Cross, her father. He looked older, face lined like weathered leather, but his stance was still robust. He rushed to her side, a look of shock and concern etched on his features. Robert, breathless. "Rachel, by God, you're alive." Her head swam with disbelief. Rachel weakly. "Father, what? How?" He eased her down onto a rock, quickly examining her wounds. "Robert, I heard rumors about the Thornbush raiders attacking. I figured you might be a target. I came as soon as I could." He tore strips of cloth from his shirt to bandage her wounds. She winced, tears of pain, mixing with tears of confusion. "Rachel, I never thought." "You cared." He paused, eyes clouded. "Robert, I'm sorry, Rachel. I know I drove you away, but you're my daughter. I couldn't stand by knowing these devils were coming for you." The father she remembered had been harsh, unyielding. Now in the aftermath of battle, she saw traces of regret in his weathered eyes. With Robert's help, Rachel hobbled to a safer spot away from the rock slide. He fetched water from a hidden canteen strapped to his horse, helping her drink. It was like nectar in her parched throat. He surveyed the carnage with a grim nod. "Robert, you did all this on your own." She nodded weakly. "Rachel, I had to." He pressed a hand to her forehead, checking for fever. "Robert, you're burning up. You need a doctor." But Rachel shook her head, eyes flicking to the bodies scattered around Rachel. There might be more raiders out there. Quinn had a decent-sized gang. Robert's lips thinned into a line. "Robert, they'll think twice before coming back. Let's get you to Sable Rock." She resisted. "Rachel, my ranch, everything Carl and I had, it's gone." He gripped her shoulder gently. "Robert, you can rebuild or you can find a new place, but right now you need to live." A wave of dizziness hit her and she nearly collapsed. Robert caught her, hoisting her up, Rachel whispering, "All that sacrifice." For what? His expression hardened, but in his eyes she sensed a fierce pride. "Robert, for your freedom, for your life, that's what matters." They managed to saddle Robert's horse, assisting Rachel onto it. Blood soaked her side, but she clung to consciousness, relying on her father's steady presence. Together they began the slow trek towards Sable Rock. Hours passed, the desert sun climbed higher, punishing them with its usual intensity. Robert kept a careful eye on the horizon, rifle in hand, in case any surviving raiders tried an ambush. As they neared the outskirts of town, Rachel faded in and out of delirium. She vaguely registered a crowd gathering. She heard voices shouting for a doctor, then unexpectedly a voice she never thought she'd hear again. Voice disbelieving Rachel. My God. Her swimming vision cleared just enough to see Henry Glover among the townspeople, tears streaming down his face. He helped Robert carry her inside the small medical clinic. Henry, she's alive. Thank the Lord, in a haze of pain. Rachel remembered Henry's betrayal. She summoned a last burst of energy. Rachel weakly. Henry. You. He bowed his head. Henry. They had my family, but they're safe now. The raiders pulled back after your stand at the ranch. Most of them are gone. I'm sorry. She tried to speak, but darkness closed in. Rachel drifted through fever dreams. She saw images of Carl reaching out to her, her father standing stoic against the desert sun, Jed limping across a barren field. She heard gunshots echo, felt the heat of fire on her skin again. Days later, she awakened in the clinic, bandaged and weak. Molly Jensen sat by her bedside, crocheting quietly. Molly's eyes lit up when she saw Rachel stir Molly. Oh, thank heavens you're awake. Rachel's throat was too dry to speak, so Molly helped her sip water from a tin cup. Molly, you've been out for nearly 3 days. We weren't sure if you'd pull through. Rachel attempted to sit up, wincing at the pain in her ribs and calf. Rachel rasping, Is it over? The raiders? Molly pursed her lips. Molly, the ones who survived ran off. The sheriff and some townsfolk found your place littered with their dead. They say you killed or crippled most of them. Quinn's body wasn't found, though. Could be buried or escaped. A chill ran through Rachel. Quinn might still be out there. Over the next 2 weeks, Rachel stayed in Sable Rock, healing under the care of the town doctor. Her father visited her often, their conversations tentative but growing warmer. He asked her about Carl, about the life she'd led. She recounted the ranch's struggles, the heartbreak of Carl's murder. Henry Glover, racked with guilt, helped pay for her medical bills. He explained how the raiders had threatened to torture his wife and children if he didn't betray Rachel's traps. Rachel, though deeply hurt, understood the power of that threat. She nodded in solemn forgiveness. Eventually, as she improved, the question loomed. Would she return to the ranch? Sable Rock's residents offered to help her rebuild. Even her father suggested she might come stay with him on his small homestead in the next territory. But Rachel felt a pull back to the desert she knew. One evening, as Rachel tested her legs with a walk through the main street, she noticed a figure standing outside the saloon. A woman with a sun-creased face and an old cavalry jacket. The woman turned and locked eyes with Rachel, a faint knowing smile on her lips. Rachel frowning. Do I know you? The woman's gaze was intense. Woman. Not personally, but you did me a kindness once. Widow Beckett, you and your husband let me water my horse when I was in a bad way. A vague memory surfaced years ago. A drifter had come by their ranch near death from thirst. Carl and Rachel gave her water and some food. Rachel, you look different than I remember. The woman nodded, stepping closer. Woman, people change. I'm known as Black-Eyed Bess these days. I've been riding with the Thornbush Raiders for the past year. Rachel's stomach dropped. Rachel. You're one of them. Bess shrugged. Bess. I was, but Quinn's losing power. Half of them are dead or fled. Some of the men wanted to take everything you had. I just wanted to survive. Her eyes flickered with resentment. Bess, Carl was a decent man, and so were you. But in this world, decency gets you killed. I had to choose a side. Rachel's pulse quickened. She glanced around. The street was empty this time of night. Rachel, if you're here for revenge, then do it. I'm past caring. Bess chuckled bitterly. Bess, revenge. No. It's more complicated. Quinn might still be alive, and if he is, he'll come for you again. But I'm done being his lackey. She reached into her pocket, producing a small piece of paper. Bess, this is all that's left of Quinn's plan. a stash location where he was heading if things went south. You might want to know. Rachel eyed her warily. Rachel, why give it to me? Bess's lips curled in a grim smile. Bess, you saved my life once. Call this my twisted way of settling the debt. She tossed the paper at Rachel's feet and turned to walk away, spurs jangling. Rachel, Bess, if Quinn's still alive. I'll finish what I started. Bess paused, glancing over her shoulder. Bess, maybe you will, or maybe the desert will finish you both. She disappeared into the darkness. Rachel bent down, retrieving the paper. It showed a rough map marking a ravine northeast of town. Could Quinn really be hiding there? Rachel stared at the map under the flickering lamplight back in the clinic. She felt the ache of her wounds, the exhaustion of her ordeal. Part of her wanted to never face Quinn again, yet a deeper part knew she couldn't live looking over her shoulder, waiting for him to strike. Rachel softly. I have to end this. Her father found her studying the map. Robert, you're in no shape to ride out and fight again. She gave him a determined look. Rachel, I won't rest until I know he's gone. Robert exhaled slowly. Robert, then I'll ride with you. She shook her head. Rachel, no, father. I need you to stay here. Protect the folks in case I fail. He opened his mouth to protest, but saw the resolve in her eyes. Robert reluctantly. All right, but don't expect me not to worry. Rachel saddled up a borrowed horse, her leg and side still heavily bandaged. She checked her gun's packed water and set off into the desert night alone, riding toward the final confrontation. The tension mounts with Rachel, half injured, but driven by a need to finish the threat. She heads for the ravine where Quinn may be hiding, setting the stage for the climax in part 3. The desert under moonlight was a study in stark contrasts, silver on the high ridges, black shadow in the gullies. Every rock, every cactus loomed larger than life in the ghostly glow. Rachel Beckett pressed a hand to her bandaged side where each jolt of her borrowed horse sent pain through her body, but she grit her teeth and rode on. She had to end this. The possibility that Quinn, leader of the Thornbush Raiders, survived meant he could regroup, come back stronger, and destroy everything she held dear. Never again, she told herself. By dawn, she reached the ravine marked on Bess's map. It was a jagged slash in the desert, with stony walls rising from a narrow floor. The remnants of a trickle of water from an underground spring glistened in the early light, an oasis for anyone desperate enough to hide there. She dismounted at a safe distance, hitching the horse behind an outcropping of rocks. She checked her firearms, a revolver at each hip, her father's old rifle strapped to her back. With a shaky breath, she began the careful descent into the ravine on foot. Her leg throbbed and she had to support herself against the canyon wall. The air was cooler here, the high walls casting shade. As she moved deeper, she heard a faint echo of voices. Voice 1 echoing, "We should get moving soon." Voice 2, rough but familiar. "Shut your mouth, I ain't leaving until I'm sure." Quinn. Rachel's pulse quickened, a mixture of fear and determination. She crept forward, using the rocks as cover until she spotted them. Quinn, his black duster torn and dusty an arm in a sling. He was crouched near the small stream along with 3 surviving raiders. Nearby lay saddlebags, presumably containing supplies and loot. From her vantage point, Rachel could see Quinn's eyes were bloodshot, his expression haggard. The rock slide had taken its toll, but the hatred in his gaze remained fierce. Quinn snarling to his men, "We'll strike again when we're strong enough. I ain't leaving that ranch or that woman behind." Rachel's grip tightened on her rifle. She quietly aimed, lining up Quinn's head in her sights. Her finger hovered on the trigger, a perfect kill shot if her battered body could hold steady. But before she could fire, a wave of pain seized her side, making her grimace. She jerked slightly, the shot going wide. A bullet pinged off the rocks near Quinn's feet. He dove behind a boulder with surprising speed, his men whipping out their guns. Raider up on the ledge, gunfire erupted, bullets ricocheting off the canyon walls. Rachel ducked, cursing under her breath. The element of surprise was gone. Pinned behind a rocky outcrop, Rachel waited for a lull in the shooting. Quinn's men advanced along the ravine floor, firing relentlessly. She popped up to return fire, managing to clip one raider's shoulder. He spun and fell cursing. Another shot hammered the rock near her face, sending shards of stone into her cheek. Rachel hissing in pain. Damn it! Her mind raced. She was outnumbered and injured with no easy escape route, but she knew the terrain might offer an advantage. There were side paths above the ravine floor. If she could force them into a bottleneck, maybe she'd stand a chance. Summoning her strength, she crawled to a narrow ledge that wound higher up. Every movement sent fire through her calf. The raiders' gunfire echoed below. Finally, she found a perch overlooking the ravine's midpoint. She braced her rifle, took a deep breath, and fired at a second raider. He went down with a cry, dropping his weapon. Quinn shouting, "Fan out," circle around behind her. Rachel saw two men scrambling up opposite sides of the ravine, trying to flank her. Gritting her teeth, she reloaded. She noticed a precarious rock formation just above Quinn's position. Large boulders stacked in a balancing act. A few well-placed shots might send them crashing down. Carefully, she aimed at a wedge-shaped stone that supported the stack. 2 bullets later, cracks appeared, dust trickling from above. The formation groaned. Quinn looking up. What the thunderous crash followed as the rocks tumbled down, forcing Quinn and his men to scatter. One raider wasn't quick enough. A boulder pinned his leg, eliciting a terrified scream. Quinn dove clear, rolling onto the canyon floor, eyes blazing. "Quinn, you think that'll stop me?" "You're a dead woman, Beckett." He fired blindly in her direction, forcing her to duck. She felt a bullet tear through the back of her shirt, grazing her skin. She stifled a cry, her body slick with sweat and blood. The 2 men flanking her had now closed in. She caught sight of one creeping around, a ledge, revolver in hand. Summoning her last reserves, she drew her own revolver and fired twice. The man dropped, tumbling down the slope, but the second flanker tackled her from behind, sending her rifle clattering away. She gasped as they rolled across the ground, her injuries roaring with pain. He pinned her arms, a knife glinting in his hand. Raider sneering. "You've made a real mess of things, lady." She snarled, bucking her hips to throw him off balance. With her free hand, she seized a loose rock and smashed it against his temple. He slumped, momentarily dazed. She wasted no time scrabbling for a pistol. Before he could rise, she put a bullet through his chest, Rachel panting. Not this time. Now it was just Quinn. Rachel could hear him cursing behind a cluster of rocks near the stream. Cautiously, she descended every step, agony. She reloaded her revolver, determined to end this. Rachel calling out, "Quinn, there's nowhere left to run." A short laugh echoed Quinn. "Run after all you've done? You think I'm scared of you?" She rounded the boulder, gun raised. He was on one knee, favoring his injured arm, a revolver aimed at her. They locked eyes, their hatred palpable. For a moment, time seemed to still. The gentle trickle of water was the only sound in the canyon. Quinn, low, venomous. "You destroyed my men, my operations, made me crawl like an animal." Rachel, voice shaking with rage. "You killed my husband, burned my home, shot my dog, you took everything." He smirked. "Quinn, then come and finish it." Widow. Their guns fired almost simultaneously. Rachel felt her shoulder jerk back, a burning sensation tearing through her upper arm. Quinn spun from the impact of her bullet, dropping to the ground with a grunt. She staggered, nearly collapsing from pain and blood loss. Quinn lay on his side, clutching a wound in his chest. She limped over, revolver still trained on him. Quinn coughing blood. "Go on. Do it." Her hands shook. Every fiber of her being screamed for vengeance to make him suffer as she had. Yet she hesitated. She thought of Carl's kind eyes, the way he always believed in mercy. "Rachel, you don't deserve it, but I won't stoop to your level." She turned to walk away, to let him bleed out alone. Quinn gasping, voice weak. "Coward. We should have finished you long ago." He coughed, trying to raise his gun again, but his strength failed. Rachel kept walking, tears mingling with dust on her cheeks. Each step felt like a step away from vengeance's final curse. She might let the desert claim him as it claimed so many. A sudden gunshot echoed. Quinn had managed one last shot, though the bullet whizzed harmlessly past her. Without thinking, Rachel whirled and fired back. Her bullet caught him square in the forehead, ending his life in an instant. She froze, revolver smoking in her hand, watching Quinn's body slump into the dirt. A wave of complicated emotion crashed over her. Relief, sorrow, emptiness. The man who had haunted her dreams was gone, but the cost had been enormous. Rachel hoarsely, "Carl, it's over." It took every ounce of willpower for Rachel to climb out of the ravine. She used the walls for support, slipping and sliding on loose gravel. Blood dripped from her wounds, each breath a jagged knife in her ribs. Her borrowed horse waited whinnying anxiously. She managed to mount up, swaying in the saddle. With trembling reins, she guided the horse back across the desert toward Sable Rock. The sun rose to a blazing zenith, scorching her anew. Her vision blurred and she fought to stay conscious, clinging to the thought of finishing this last ride. By the time she reached the outskirts of town, the horse was lathered in sweat and Rachel was barely upright. A concerned local ran forward. Others followed, calling for the doctor. She felt hands pulling her down from the saddle, someone pressing a cloth to her wounds. Her final memory before blacking out was her father's voice shouting her name. Rachel drifted in feverish dreams for days. When she finally woke, she was in the same small clinic. Bandages wrapped her body like a mummy. Molly Jensen sat in the corner, eyes shut in a light doze. Rachel licked her cracked lips, croaking a greeting. Molly startled awake, then rushed to her side. Molly, eyes shining. "Rachel, you made it." A flood of relief washed over Rachel, though the pain still throbbed. "Rachel Quinn." Molly nodded solemnly. "Molly, they found his body in the ravine. You did it, Rachel." She let her head sink back on the pillow, tears leaking from the corners of her eyes, Rachel whispering, "Carl, it's done." Over the following weeks, Rachel's father, Robert Cross, stayed by her side, helping with her recovery. The townspeople of Sable Rock regarded her with a mixture of awe and respect. The widow who single-handedly nearly wiped out the Thornbush Raiders. Donations poured in, food money, offers of assistance to rebuild Henry Glover. Found Rachel in the clinic one afternoon, a bouquet of desert flowers in hand. "Henry, I wanted to thank you and apologize again. You saved us all, despite what I did." She regarded him quietly, remembering the pain of his betrayal. But seeing his remorse, she gave a small nod. "Rachel, we all do what we must to protect the ones we love." A companionable silence passed between them as Rachel's wounds began to heal. People asked, what now? Would she return to the charred remains of her ranch or start anew elsewhere? Even Robert gently suggested she join him on his homestead to mend the rift in their family. But Rachel had her own ideas. "Rachel, my ranch might be burned, but the land is still mine. Carl's memory is there. I won't abandon it." Yet she knew she couldn't live there alone again, vulnerable to the next band of outlaws. So she formulated a plan, discussing it with the sheriff and some folks in town. Perhaps a small community watch station could be built on her land, a place travelers could stop for water and safety. In exchange, a few volunteers would live there, providing security. The sheriff agreed, seeing it as a strategic stronghold in the desert. Henry and a few younger ranch hands offered to help with construction, and a handful of families expressed interest in settling near her property, forming a tight-knit group rather than isolated homesteads. One morning, as Rachel sat outside the clinic in a rocking chair, enjoying the first time she'd felt the sun, without dread, she saw Saul Bixby arrive with a wagon. In the back lay none other than Jed, tail thumping weakly against the wood. Rachel smiling through tears. "Jed." He let out a soft bark, struggling to his feet. She rushed forward on unsteady legs, dropping to her knees to hug the dog. He licked her face, whining happily. "Saul, the vet patched him up real good. Figured you might want him back." Rachel buried her face in Jed's fur, relief flooding her. Rachel murmuring, "We made it, boy. We both made it." Once she was strong enough to travel, Rachel returned to her ranch with a small caravan of volunteers. The sight was painful: charred beams, craters where dynamite had torn the ground, pieces of twisted metal. The ghosts of that terrible night lingered, but as the days passed, the group cleared, debris salvaged what they could. Under Rachel's direction, they began constructing new structures, sturdier and more defensible. They built a communal bunkhouse, a stable, and a storage shed. Fences went up around the perimeter. Robert Cross joined in, though he often stood watch rather than building. He and Rachel shared a few quiet moments, looking out over the horizon together. "Robert, you've done me proud, Rachel. You've become stronger than I ever was." She cast him a sidelong glance. Rachel, I don't know about that. You taught me how to survive. I just wish we hadn't lost so many years. He cleared his throat, emotion making his voice rough. Robert, we got time now if you'll have me. She reached for his hand, gripping it gently. Rachel, I'd like that. Before building anything permanent, Rachel insisted on honoring Carl's memory. She led a small procession to the hill where Carl was buried beneath the mesquite tree. Now that tree was singed from the fires, its leaves thin and brittle. Still it stood much like Rachel, standing by Carl's grave. She placed fresh flowers, her eyes brimming with tears. The others stood respectfully behind her. She bent down, pressing a hand to the mound of earth. Rachel softly, "We did it, Carl. They won't hurt anyone else. I miss you every day." She rose, taking a deep breath. It felt like a final chapter closing, allowing her to step forward into a new one. Weeks turned into months. The new buildings took shape under the collective effort of the volunteers. Families arrived with wagons, setting up small homesteads around Rachel's land. A sense of camaraderie replaced the isolation that once defined the area. Rachel, now walking with a slight limp, oversaw the creation of a watchtower near the spot where the old barn once stood. She placed a plaque dedicated to all who defend this land from lawlessness. Sheriff Crenshaw made periodic visits, impressed by the transformation. Sheriff, this place was a war zone, and now it's something else entirely. Rachel nodded, rubbing Jed's ears. Rachel, that's the idea. No more easy targets out here. We stand together. Life settled into a different rhythm. Rachel taught newcomers how to set traps, maintain firearms, and handle the harsh desert environment, passing on the lessons once forced upon her. She found satisfaction in sharing knowledge rather than hoarding it. Her father, having reconciled, built a modest cabin on a nearby slope. He often joined Rachel and Jed for morning coffee, reminiscing about old cavalry days. Henry Glover's children ran around the yard, laughing, free from fear of outlaws. Sometimes at sunset, Rachel would sit on the porch of her rebuilt home, smaller than before, but cozy, and watch the sky blaze pink and orange. She'd think of Carl, of the life they were supposed to have. She'd think of the battles she'd fought, the lines she'd crossed, Rachel whispering to the wind. I hope you're at peace, Carl. She felt a bittersweet acceptance forming within her. The scars, physical and emotional, would never fully fade, but they no longer defined her. A year passed. The communal ranch thrived as a testament to resilience. Travelers along the desert roads now spoke of Widow Beckett's outpost, a place where they could find water supplies and protection. Outlaws gave the territory a wide berth, fearful of the legendary traps and the determined people who lived there. Rachel Beckett had become a reluctant hero. She never sought fame or legend, only justice and security. In time, she and her father expanded the ranch, planting new crops, breeding a small herd of cattle with Henry's help. Jed, though slower with age, remained her faithful companion, content to rest in the shade of the new porch. Sometimes strangers arrived, telling wild tales of how a solitary widow annihilated a gang of raiders. Rachel would just shake her head, offering them a place to stay for the night, reminding them that it wasn't just her, countless others gave her help along the way. But in her heart, she knew that night of fire when outlaws burned her ranch had forged her into someone else. A woman tempered by loss, guided by the memories of those she loved. And though the desert was still harsh, still unforgiving, it no longer felt so lonely. The desert remembers everything: the scars carved in sand and stone, the whispers carried by an endless wind. It remembers a woman's courage born from loss, tempered by grief. She had given the desert her tears, her blood, her heart, and the desert in turn taught her strength, resilience, and the bitter truth that justice often comes at a heavy price. What remained was not just ash and ruin, but a testament to the power of determination, community, and hope rising from despair. Her ranch had once stood alone against the horizon. Now it stood as a beacon, proof that even in the harshest soil, something new could grow. Yet beneath that quiet triumph lingered a gentle ache, the memory of loved ones lost, battles fought, and the cost paid in full. Perhaps the greatest lesson the desert taught was not in vengeance, but in letting go, in healing the wounds that no bullet could mend. And as the sun dipped slowly below the horizon, leaving only shadows and silence, one thought lingered softly in the air.